Hello, welcome to Microfiche Microphone. I'm Micah, and on this channel we look at microfiche from the past, old newspaper articles in the public domain. We look at them with our modern eyes, our modern perspective, and see what we can learn from them. On this microfiche time capsule, we are looking back at a comprehensive history of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints by B.H. Roberts, Volume 2. And we are reading a couple of different, part of one chapter, part of chapter 42 and all of chapter 48, because our subject today is on John C. Bennett. John C. Bennett was a counselor in the First Presidency under Joseph Smith. So we are kind of going back and filling in that gap, that hole of information that we hadn't covered before. The reason I hadn't covered it before was because I couldn't find an article on him. I checked all of the usual sources. He wasn't in the Biographical Encyclopedia. He wasn't in any of the old church periodicals. He wasn't in the Contributor. He wasn't in the Improvement Era. He wasn't in the Relief Society magazine. He wasn't in the Young Women's Journal. And so I was like, come on, it has to be somewhere, right? Well, I discovered that there is a section on him in a comprehensive history of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So this is B.H. Roberts' big, historical project that he worked on in late 1920s. And so because I don't know that much about John C. Bennett, I thought that we would look at the information that B.H. Roberts had collected. Now, since this is whole book chapters, I don't know how long this is going to take. It may take a bit, but I think we'll get through it, especially since we have no other information on this person. So what do I know about him? The only thing I know about him, besides the fact that I'm pretty sure he was a doctor, is that he was kind of a creep. I understood that he hit on a lot of the women, especially the married women who were in the church, and that's why he got excommunicated. So I think that was it. That's what I remember anyway. But I don't know if I'm right. So we will find out, yeah? So let's jump in. I am reading from an actual physical book today. I do have screenshots from the digital version, but I thought that I would read my actual book that I have. See? Yeah? Anyway, okay, we are starting on page 47. John Cook Bennett. This man has been variously described by those who have written of his connections with the church. Ex-Governor Ford of Illinois speaks of him as probably the greatest scamp in the western country. And I will also read the footnotes. This one says, I'm going to read the previous footnote as well, because I think that was in the previous paragraph, but it looks related. John Cook Bennett was born in Massachusetts in 1804, and he practiced physician in Ohio and later in Illinois, holding a professorship in Willoughby University, Ohio, and taking with him to Illinois testimonials as to his professional skill. In the latter state, he showed a taste for military affairs, and after being selected Brigadier General of the Invincible Dragoons, he was appointed Quartermaster General of the state, 1840, and held that position at the state capitol when the Mormons applied to the legislature for the charter for Nauvoo. Story of the Mormons, Lynn, page 236. And then this footnote says, History of Illinois, Ford, page 263. Continuing from the short above characterization, he says, I have made particular inquiries concerning him and have traced him in several places in which he had lived before he joined the Mormons in Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois, and he was everywhere accounted the same debauched, unprincipled, and profligate character. Sounds like a real winner, yeah? Gregg says he was a man of liberal education, excessively vain and pompous, but of good address. He also says that Bennett brought with him to Nauvoo, if not a tainted, at least a questionable reputation. The Prophet of Palmyra, page 173. H. Bancroft grows positively abusive about Bennett, speaks of him as a fraud. He has ability, he has brains, but not soul. Geez, they're really negative about him. History of Utah, page 149. This is Bancroft's description of Bennett. About this time there comes to Joseph Smith a somewhat singular individual making somewhat singular advances. He is a Yankee huckster of the first class. Only for his merchandise, instead of patent clocks and wooden nutmeg, he offers for sale theology, medicine, and a general assortment of political and military wares. The thing is a fraud, and before long he openly announces himself as such. As his manhood is far superior to his duplicity, so is his name. Reverend General John C. Bennett, M.D., USA. President, Chancellor, and Master in Chancery, as we may observe, is subordinate to his titles. He has ability, he has brains, and fingers, but he has no soul. Lynn declares him to be a man who seems to lack moral character, but who has filled positions of importance. The Story of the Mormons, Lynn, page 236. It must be remembered, however, that more or less of prejudice enters into these characterizations of Dr. Bennett, because of his connection with Mormonism. The prophet speaks of him as a man of enterprise, extensive acquirements, and of independent mind, and as calculated to be a great blessing to our community. Proclamations of the First Presidency, History of the Church, Period 1, Volume 4, page 276. So basically what we're hearing is that nobody trusted him except Joseph Smith. It sounds very characteristic of Joseph Smith, does it not? I mean, he was a very trusting individual, I think. Notwithstanding this estimate of Dr. Bennett's abilities, there is a temptation, when the whole truth about this man is known, to regard him as an adventurer and a wicked man from the beginning. But those who had perhaps the best opportunity to know him held that his motives for coming to Nauvoo were honest, that his intentions in life at that time were honorable, but that he later fell into transgression and would not repent. Now that's a little more typical, yes, of the people who came to Joseph Smith. Such were the views of the late President John Taylor, who was closely associated with Bennett in affairs at Nauvoo. Elder Taylor's testimony is as follows. Respecting John C. Bennett, I was well acquainted with him. At one time he was a good man, but fell into adultery, and was cut off from the church for his iniquity. And so bad was his conduct that he was also expelled from the municipal court, of which he was a member. He then went lecturing through the country, and commenced writing pamphlets for the sake of making money, charging so much for admittance to his lectures and selling his slanders. His remarks, however, were so bad, that his statements so obscene and disgraceful that respectable people were disgusted. From Public Discussion in France, History of the Church, Period 1, Volume 5, page 81, note. And the Lord in the Revelation, given on the 19th of January, 1841, accepts of him and speaks approvingly of Bennett's love for the work. And for his love he shall be great. I have seen the work which he hath done, which I accept if he continue, and will crown him with blessings and great glory. Doctrine and Covenants, section 124, verse 17. It cannot be otherwise then, but that John C. Bennett is coming to the saints did so out of love for the work. He had a desire to work righteousness, but he was among those who failed. He did not continue in his right intention. It is possible, even for men whose lives are not above reproach, to feel indignation at acts of injustice such as were perpetuated upon the Latter-day Saints by the state of Missouri. And sure it is that John C. Bennett expressed himself very pronouncedly against the injustice suffered by the church at the hands of the officers and people of that state, and he proffered his military knowledge and prowess to the saints while the latter were yet in Missouri, but undergoing expulsion. His proposal was to go to their assistance with all the forces he could raise in Illinois, as his bosom swelled with indignation at the treatment the saints were receiving at the hands of the Missourians. That proffered service, however, was not accepted, because the saints depended for vindication of their reputation and redress of their wrongs upon the officers of the state and nation, rather than upon indignation of incensed persons, however sincere and well-meaning, who offered their services to wage war upon their enemies. But after the saints had begun gathering at Commerce, Bennett again expressed a desire to connect his fortunes with them. When he contemplated removing to Commerce, he held the position of Quartermaster General in the militia of the state of Illinois, a position which he did not wish to resign. Indeed, he expressed a desire to hold the position for a number of years. He was also a physician with an extensive practice, and forwarded extracts to the prophet from the Louisville Courier Journal, which gave evidence of high standing in his profession. Writing of these things to the prophet, he said, I do not expect to resign my office of Quartermaster General of the state of Illinois in the event of my removal to commerce, unless you advise otherwise. I shall likewise expect to practice my profession, but at the same time your people shall have all the benefit of my speaking powers and my untiring energies in behalf of the good and holy faith. You are aware that at the time of your most bitter persecution I was with you in feeling, and I proffered you my military knowledge and prowess. Okay. While Joseph extended a hearty welcome to the doctor to come to commerce, he by no means held out very much flattering inducements to him, as may be seen by his letters in answer to Bennett's expressing his determination to join the saints. The prophet said, I have no doubt that you would be of great service to the community in practicing your profession, as well as those other abilities of which you are in possession. Though to devote your time and abilities to the cause of truth and a suffering people may not be the means of exalting you in the eyes of this generation, or securing you the riches of the world, yet by so doing you may rely on the approval of Jehovah, that blessing which maketh rich and addeth no sorrow. Therefore my general invitation is, let all who will come and partake of the poverty of Nauvoo freely. I should be disposed to give you a special invitation to come as early as possible, believing you will be of great service to us. However, you must make your own arrangements according to your circumstances. Were it possible for you to come here this season to suffer affliction with the people of God, no one will be more pleased to give you a cordial welcome than myself. Bennett's somewhat effusive letters to the prophet's answer are published in the History of the Church, Period 1, Volume 4, Chapter 9. Surely this was frank enough, and ought to have dispelled from the doctor's mind all thoughts of winning worldly fame, or gratifying vain ambition, by linking his fortunes with those of the Church of Jesus Christ. The whole course of the prophet here outlined, dealing with the advent of John C. Bennett, vindicates him and the Church from any complicity with the subsequent wickedness and vileness of that man. Wow! Bennett's activities in the affairs of Nauvoo and his final perfidy and apostasy belong to future chapters. Yeah, and we're going to read one. That was interesting. I feel like they're very, very negative about John C. Bennett. I wonder, B.H. Roberts knew about him from the very beginning, or if he just felt the need to, like, tell everybody, by the way, this guy's horrible. You know? It's interesting that he just decided to just out him like that. So, I don't know. It's a little bit strange, yeah? It'd just be like, from the very beginning, oh yeah, he's terrible. He's a terrible guy. You're like, wow, seriously? Like, yeah, he is. So, anyway, now there is an entire chapter devoted to John C. Bennett, and it is called Chapter 48, The Fall of Dr. John C. Bennett. And so I thought we could read that today. It is, as you may have noticed already, a tiny bit more academically written than a lot of the things we've read so far. So it's not really conversational, it's not really telling stories. These are facts, yeah? And they're cited facts as well. So, B.H. Roberts, he is very factual. The first intimation given in our annals which foreshadows the coming fall of John C. Bennett is in May 1842. On the 7th of that month, there was a special military display in sham battle by the Nauvoo Legion, for which there had been an intermittent preparation from the 25th to the preceding January, when the order for general inspection, parade, and sham battle had been made. The review and sham battle were preceded by an officers' banquet at the house of President Smith, and such was the interest in the military event that Judge Stephen A. Douglas adjourned the circuit court, then in session at Carthage, and with other officers of the court and leading lawyers rode out to Nauvoo to be present on the occasion, which had long been a matter of curiosity and some excitement throughout Hancock County. Hearing of the presence of Judge Douglas in Nauvoo, President Smith at once sent an invitation to him and his company to be present at the officers' banquet, which was accepted. 26 companies amounting to 2,000 men were on inspection and parade. In the afternoon, the Legion was separated into cohorts and fought an animated sham battle, the first cohort under the command of General Wilson Law, the second under General Charles C. Rich. At the close of the battle, President Smith delivered an animated speech expressing satisfaction with the Legion. Under the date, President Smith makes the following entry in his journal. Okay, so they're doing some sort of like pretend battle. It's a little weird, but okay, I guess they do need training, you know, in the Nauvoo Legion. The prophet's position in the Legion's sham battle. I was solicited by General Bennett to take command of the first cohort during the sham battle. This I declined. General Bennett next requested me to take my station in the rear of the cavalry, without my staff during the engagement, but this was counteracted by Captain A.P. Rockwood, commander of my lifeguards, who kept close by my side, and I chose my own position. I wonder why he wanted that. And if General Bennett's true feelings toward me are not made manifest to the world in a very short time, then it may be possible that the gentle breathings of that spirit which whispered to me on parade that there was mischief concealed in that sham battle were false. A short time will determine the point. Interesting. Whoa. Let John C. Bennett answer at the time of judgment. Why did you request me to command one of the cohorts, and also to take my position without my staff during the sham battle on the 7th of May, 1842, where my life might have been the forfeit, and no man had known who did the deed? Really? He suspected him of plotting against him? History of the Church, Period 1, Volume 5, page 4. Wow. Wow. That's crazy. And he was still a member of the First Presidency. I'm surprised. Like, why he didn't immediately call him out. Matters developed rapidly after this in the affairs of John C. Bennett. 10 days after the sham battle, he resigned as mayor of Nauvoo. President Joseph Smith was elected mayor in his place by the city council, and Hiram Smith vice mayor. This action of Bennett's was forced by the rising tide of popular indignation against the evil and corrupt manner of life into which he had fallen. Okay. For some time he had been guilty of gross licentiousness. Whoa, that's quite a word, isn't it? He had betrayed the innocent by most insidious and seductive arts, and had used the name of President Smith to accomplish his base ends by declaring that the president and other leading elders of the church countenanced and practiced such conduct, and taught that no sin attached to it if it was but kept secret. Ew, that's so gross. Yet when confronted on these charges, he vigorously denied them. Wow. On the day of his resignation, Bennett went before Daniel H. Wells, one of the aldermen of Nauvoo, but not then a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and made an affidavit in which he said, Bennett's exoneration of the prophet. He was never taught anything in the least contrary to the strictest principles of the gospel, or of virtue, or of the laws of man, under any circumstances, or upon any occasion, either directly or indirectly in word or deed, by Joseph Smith, and that he never knew that the said Smith to countenance any improper conduct whatever, either in public or private, and that he never did teach to me in private that an illicit intercourse with females was under any circumstance justifiable, and that I never knew him to so teach others. Okay, I bid page 11. So he denied it, basically. Okay. 2 days later, in the presence of the full city council and the house crowded with spectators, President Joseph Smith asked Bennett to state if he knew aught against him, to which Bennett replied, I know what I am about, and the heads of the church know what they are about, I expect. I have no difficulty with the heads of the church. I publicly avow that anyone who has said that I have stated that General Joseph Smith has given me authority to hold illicit intercourse with women is a liar in the face of God, and those who have said it are damned liars. Wow. And they are infernal liars. They never, either in public or in private, gave me any such authority or license, and any person who states it is a scoundrel and a liar. I have heard it said that I should become a second avard by withdrawing from the church, and that I was at variance with the heads, i.e. of the church, and should use an influence against them because I resigned the office of mayor. This is false. I have no difficulty with the heads of the church, and I intend to continue with you, and hope the time may come that when I will be restored to full confidence and fellowship, and my former standing in the church, and that my conduct may be such as to warrant my restoration. And should the time ever come that I may have an opportunity to test my faith, it will then be known whether I am a traitor or a true man. Joseph Smith then asked, will you please state definitively whether you know anything against my character, either in public or in private? General Bennett answered, I do not. In all my intercourse with General Smith, in public and in private, he has been strictly virtuous. History of the Church, Period 1, Volume 5, page 38 and 39. Okay. Wow. Basically, he's calling anyone a liar who said that he did teach them anything different. I guess it's just a denial defense, but it's pretty weak, not gonna lie. Bennett's confession before the Masons. The above statement is signed by the 5 aldermen and the 8 councilors comprising the city council, and attested by James Sloan, the city recorder, under date of May 19, 1842. On the 26th of May, the case of Bennett came up in the Masonic Lodge, of which the doctor was a member, as were also nearly all the principal men of Nauvoo. In the presence of more than 100 of the fraternity, he confessed his licentious practices. Oh, gosh, and acknowledged that he was worthy of the severest chastisement. And yet he pleaded for mercy, and especially that he might not be published in the papers. Typical narcissist, yeah? So deep apparently was his sorrow that President Joseph Smith pleaded for mercy in his behalf. And he was forgiven at that time as a Mason, but previous to this, viz. On the 11th of May, the First Presidency of the Church, the 12, and the presiding bishop had sent a formal notice to Bennett that they could not fellowship him as a member of the church, but they withheld the matter from publication at his earnest solicitation because of his mother. Of course, because of his mother. No, he's just ashamed. He's ashamed and he doesn't want it to be known. That's ridiculous. John C. Bennett, however, had fallen too far to recover from the effects of his deep transgression. He suddenly left Nauvoo, and soon afterward was found plotting with the enemies of the saints for the destruction of the church. Wow, that was fast. By this time, the Masonic Lodge learned that he was an expelled Mason, and had palmed himself off on the Nauvoo Lodge as a Mason in regular standing. Consequently, he was disfellowshipped from the Nauvoo Lodge, and was also cashiered by the court-martial of the Nauvoo Legion. Yeah, makes sense, yeah? So he's basically slowly being kicked out of every organization he belongs to, yeah? Double dealing and claims of duress. After Bennett left Nauvoo, he said that President Joseph Smith had authorized and encouraged promiscuous sexual wickedness. But he just said that he didn't. That's so weird. And when confronted with his own affidavit, which declared President Smith to be a virtuous man and a teacher of righteousness and upright both in public and private character, he claimed that he was under duress when he had made that affidavit. Of course he was. But Squire Wells, before whom Bennett had qualified to make his sworn statement, went before a justice of the peace, and made affidavit that during the time that Bennett's wickedness was going on, and he, the while making statements favorable to the character of President Smith in the church. During all this time, if he, Dr. Bennett, was under duress or fear, he must have had a good faculty for concealing it, for he was at liberty to go and come when and where he pleased, so far as I am capable of judging. So he lied. Squire Wells further testifies in the same statement, I was always personally friendly with him, Bennett, after I became acquainted with him. I never heard him say anything derogatory to the character of Joseph Smith until after he had been exposed by said Smith on the public stand in Nauvoo. Of course he was. Affidavit of Daniel H. Wells will be found in full in the History of the Church, Period 1, Volume 5, page 882. Wow. All the members of the City Council made a conjoint affidavit to the same effect. See History of the Church, Period 1, Volume 5, page 68. As soon as it was learned that the doctor had left Nauvoo and was operating for the destruction of the church, the whole case was published in the Nauvoo papers, and his wickedness was made known to the world. All the publications, affidavits, and documents pertaining to this case will be found in the History of the Church, Period 1, Volume 5, Chapters 2 and 4, and the June number of the Nauvoo Wasp, page 37 and 39. Those whom he had involved in his vile snares, both men and women, were brought before the proper tribunals of the church. Some of them were disfellowshipped, and others who sincerely repented were forgiven. Okay? Bennett's expose of Mormonism. I think it's supposed to be expose, yeah? Bennett, in his role of anti-Mormon agitator and lecturer, revived his charges of unchastity against President Smith and the church leaders. Of course he did. Alleged the practice of polygamy, the existence of the Danites, secret murders, and the designs for the overthrow of the government of the United States. Of course. He ran for president. Like, he's not trying to overthrow the government. Everything, in fact, which gave promise of creating a sensation. He finally published a book under the title The History of the Saints, or an expose of Joe Smith and Mormonism. Leland and Whiting Publishers, Boston, 1842. Okay, that's interesting that he would suddenly jump that far in the other direction, you know. I mean, there were other people, he wasn't the only one, who joined the dissenters after being, disillusioned by the church and after leaving the church. But, like, publishing a book called An Expose of Joe Smith and Mormonism, anyone who called him Joe Smith clearly didn't know him. He didn't go by Joe. He went by Joseph, and he never went by Joe, ever. The only people who called him that didn't like him. Yeah, so it's weird. The low ribaldry of this book alone would condemn its author in the minds of all sincere people, and being utterly untrustworthy. Okay. If it be true that from the abundance of the heart the mouth speaketh, and what is said reveals the state of the mind, then nothing but putrid corruption occupied the mind of Dr. Bennett. Very well described there. According to Bennett's own account of himself and his connection with the people of Nauvoo, he joined the church not because he believed its doctrine or in the sincerity of its members, but for the purpose of exposing what he suspected to be the treasonable designs of the Mormons against several of the northwestern states, and the purpose of the Mormon leaders to erect upon their ruin a despotic military and religious empire, at the head of which, as emperor and pope, was to be Joseph Smith, the prophet of the Lord, and his ministers and viceroys, the apostles, high priests, elders, and bishops of the Mormon church. That's about as ridiculous as you can get. Yeah, Bennett's expose, page 5 and 6. Okay. To defeat these designs, Bennett took upon himself the heroic mission of joining the Mormons in order to detect and expose the movers and machinery of the plot. I bet. Well, considering how much he's lied, this, I think this is pretty easy to disprove. Bennett's course in this illustrates the truth of Dr. Johnson's declaration that patriotism is the last refuge of a scoundrel. Wow. That's interesting. It's interesting that they would go there. Now, this note is really long, so deep breath. We will get through it, okay? H. Bancroft, in his History of Utah, makes the following pertinent remarks upon Bennett in his book. The role of a traitor is not one in which in any wise brings credit to the performer, either from one side or the other, however great the service he may render us. We cannot but feel that he is false-hearted and vile. Many of the apostates, though they may not have written books, declare that they joined their sect only to learn their secrets and then expose them. These are the most contemptible of all. There may be cases where a young or inexperienced person, through ignorance or susceptibility, has been carried away for a time contrary to the dictates of cooler judgment, but the statements of such persons are justly regarded with more or less suspicion. Far better is it, far more honest and praiseworthy for him who, having unwittingly made a mistake, seeks to rectify it, to go his way and say nothing about it. For if he talks of writing a book for it, for the good of others as a warning, and that they may avoid his errors, few will believe him. If he has proved traitor once, they will say he will deceive again. And if he is sincere, we cannot more than half believe him, for such an individual is never sure of himself. Interesting. John C. Bennett, general, doctor, Methodist preacher, and quack, is from his own showing a bad man. Wow. The people are not holding back about him. That's crazy. He devotes some 50 pages to the vindication of his character, which would not be necessary if he were honest. Other 50 were given to defaming his late worshipful patron, Joseph Smith, which would never have been written were it be true. Okay, whatever. When a man thrusts in your face 70 certificates of his good character, each signed by one of a dozen persons, you may know that he is a very great rascal. It's like people who say, I'm such a nice person, that you're not usually, yeah? Nor are we disappointed here. The author is a charlatan, pure and simple. Such was when he joined the Mormons, and before and after. We may credit him fully when he says, I never believed in them or their doctrines, although in a letter to Dr. Dyer, dated Nauvoo, January 20th, 1842, he declares, My heart is filled with indignation, and my blood boils within me, when I contemplate the vast injustice and cruelty which Missouri has meted out to the great philanthropist and devout Christian General Joseph Smith and his honest and faithful adherents. When, however, he affects patriotism and lofty devotion to the welfare of his fellow men, pretending to have joined the society in order to frustrate a daring and colossal scheme of rebellion and usurpation throughout the northwestern states, a despotic military and religious empire, the head of which, as emperor and pope, was to be Joseph Smith, we know that the writer is well aware that it is all nonsense. History of Utah, page 150 to 151. That's pretty scathing, I'm not going to lie. The error of long suffering in Bennett's case. It must be confessed that both President Joseph Smith and the people of Nauvoo erred greatly in their treatment of John C. Bennett by being too indulgent and long suffering with him. Yeah, but like that's like the error that you would hope that you would make, you know? Like if you were going to make an error, isn't it better to be overly kind? Yeah? Than to be overly critical? So I can see why that would happen, especially if people were genuinely good people who did it. Prompter action and less trust in his professions of repentance would have been justified, much trouble prevented, and less color given to a seeming sanction of his well-known immoralities. Soon after Dr. Bennett joined the church, President Smith received a communication from the vicinity of the doctor's former home in Ohio, giving information that Bennett had a wife and 2 or 3 children in McConnellsville, Morgan County, Ohio, and that he was a wicked man. Really, because I believe he was selling himself as a bachelor, yeah? But knowing that it is no uncommon thing, writes the prophet in his explanation of the matter, for good men to be evil spoken against, the above letter was kept quiet but held in reserve. Address to the Church, Joseph Smith, Times and Seasons, Volume 3, page 839 to 842. A virtue run to seed. The doctor kept the fact of his marriage a secret, and began paying his attention to a young lady, evidently intending to marry her, which President Joseph Smith, observing, sought to dissuade him from such a course, but could not succeed until he threatened to make known the communication charging the doctor with being a married man. Shortly after this, confirmation of the fact of Bennett's being a married man was received by letter from Hiram Smith and William Law, written from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where they were given information respecting Bennett's family. Confronted with this new evidence, the doctor admitted its truth and attempted suicide by taking poison. Really? Like, that's really not in line with his character. So far, he's just, kind of the Shaggy defense. It wasn't me, From this, he was rescued by antidotes, but only to continue his career of wickedness. He was rescued by antidotes. Okay, to the poison. Interesting. Still, he was borne with in the hope of reformation, especially by President Smith, who sought with all his might to save him, but to no purpose. And meantime, the prophet brought upon himself much criticism, and by his persistent friendship for Bennett, discredited himself with many, both in the church and outside of it, but loyalty to his friends, or those whom he thought to be so, was of the essence of the prophet's nature, and truly forbearance is a great virtue, but like many other virtues, followed to excess, is become a virtue run to seed. The principle of mercy by which President Smith was actuated is very well expressed by him in an address he delivered to the Female Relief Society of the Church on the 9th of June, 1842, and in the passage quoted, he undoubtedly had in mind the case of Bennett and the criticism of himself and consequences of his excess mercy. He said, "How oft have wise men and women sought to dictate to Brother Joseph by saying, 'Oh, if I were Brother Joseph, I would do this and that.' But if they were in Brother Joseph's shoes, they would find that men and women could not be compelled into the kingdom of God, but must be dealt with in long suffering, and at last we shall save them. The way to keep all the saints together and keep the world rolling is to wait with all long suffering till God shall bring such characters to justice. There should be no license for sin, but mercy should go hand in hand with reproof." History of the Church, Period 1, Volume 5, page 24. In any event, Dr. John Cook Bennett proved himself unworthy the personal sacrifices President Smith made for him. Yeah, I think that we can say that kind of definitively. That's really interesting. So I guess all of the scathing remarks at the beginning were totally justified. He seems very narcissistic, about as narcissistic as you can be. It's interesting that Joseph Smith didn't see it at the beginning, and I will give people a pass because you don't victim blame for somebody being too nice, yeah? It's easy to do, especially if you are a genuinely nice person yourself, to just think the best about the next person, yeah? And think that other people are as well-intentioned as you are, yeah? Alright, so let's look at the Wikipedia article, see if there's anything that was missed, although that was pretty comprehensive as far as the relevant things went. They didn't talk about his death though, and it didn't talk about what he did after that, or before that for that matter. So I feel like we do have some holes. Alright, so let's take a look. John Cook Bennett, August 4th, 1804 to August 5th, 1867, was an American physician and briefly a ranking and influential leader of the Latter-day Saint movement, who acted as mayor of Nauvoo, Illinois, and major general of the Nauvoo Legion in the early 1840s. Early life. John Cook Bennett was born on August 4, 1804 in Fair Haven, Massachusetts. He married Mary A. Barker, who worked as a physician in Ohio, and helped found Willoughby Medical College. Okay, that sounds like the wife and family he had left behind, yeah? That they found out about later. Early Latter-day Saint. Bennett's involvement in the Latter-day Saint movement came after several encounters with the community that had left him impressed. He wrote several letters to Joseph Smith in Nauvoo, Illinois, in which he declared his desire to join the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He was baptized into the church in September 1840. Prior to his baptism, he had expressed his intention to join the growing body of Latter-day Saints in Nauvoo. His wife, Mary Barker, and their children did not accompany him. Yeah. Bennett was essential to the passing of the Nauvoo City Charter, the provisions of which he had helped craft in the Illinois legislature. He even garnered praise for his lobbying efforts from the young Abraham Lincoln. His efforts on behalf of the Mormons and the long time he spent living in the mansion house in Nauvoo secured Bennett the confidence of Smith. Smith was instrumental in promoting Bennett to greater civic and ecclesiastical responsibilities in Nauvoo. Bennett became a counselor in the First Presidency, according Times and Seasons, Volume 2, Number 12, page 387, on 7 November 1841, as assistant president until President Rigdon's health should be restored, and the mayor of Nauvoo, general of the Nauvoo Legion, and the chancellor of University of Nauvoo. So he was considered an additional counselor, I believe. Leaving the Latter-day Saints. Bennett left the church for adultery on May 11th, 1842. Rumors of adultery, homosexuality, and unauthorized polygamy emerged. Lovely. Like, he's very sexual, it sounds like. Like, that's a creepy side? That's creepy. It's creepy. Yeah? Contemporary sources indicate that Bennett used his trusted position as a doctor to allay fears of women he attempted to seduce by telling them that he could cause abortions by administering medicine if they became pregnant. Oh, lovely. That's just exactly what I want to hear. Gosh, that's so gross. While Bennett was mayor, he was caught in private sexual relations with women in the city. He told the women that the practice, which he termed spiritual wifery, was sanctioned by God and Smith, and that Smith did the same. No, he didn't. When discovered, he privately confessed his crimes, produced an affidavit that Smith had no part in his adultery, and was disciplined accordingly. Yeah, we just read about that. But how gross is that? How incredibly creepy is that? Because you go to a doctor, trusting this doctor probably for women's issues. Maybe you're having trouble getting pregnant. Maybe you are having multiple miscarriages and you would like to carry a baby to term. Maybe you are pregnant and you're concerned about the pregnancy, something's not right, and you go to a doctor. You know, it doesn't have to be pregnancy related, obviously, but like, I feel like a lot of reasons why young women went to doctors back then was pregnancy related, yes? And he's like, I think that it would be a good idea, you can be my spiritual wife. Joseph Smith does the same, like, what? And homosexuality, which means he was bisexual, yeah? Which is fine, but like, I wasn't actually expecting that. It was kind of just snuck up on me. I don't think I had heard about that before. But that was a way bigger deal back then than it is today. So it's interesting that was kind of like just by the way, that wasn't more prominent, more well known. It's interesting. Later life. After Bennett left Nauvoo in May 1842, he claimed that he had been the target of an attempted assassination by Nauvoo Danites, who were disguised as women. Okay, random. In July 1842, he wrote a series of letters to the Sangamo Journal accusing Smith of conspiring to assassinate former Missouri Governor Boggs. Well, I mean, if anybody had a reason to, he did, but he didn't, because that's not how he rolls. Yeah. In late 1842, Bennett published History of the Saints, or an expose of Joe Smith and Mormonism, accusing Smith and his church of crimes including treason, conspiracy to commit murder, prostitution, and adultery, with a preface that begins, "I have been induced to prepare and publish the following work by a desire to expose the enormous iniquities that have been perpetuated by one of the grossest grossest and most infamous impostors that ever appeared on the face of the earth, and by his minions under the name and garb of religion, and professedly by the direct will and command of Almighty God. Of course it was. God. Through his newspaper writings and book, Bennett appeared to encourage Missouri's June 1843 attempt to extradite Smith to stand trial for treason. Ironically, Smith narrowly escaped extradition by virtue of the powerful Nauvoo Charter, for which Bennett had been a principal author. It's like, gee, thank you, John C. Bennett, for writing this before you started writing that. Yeah. In the fall of 1843, Bennett visited George M. Hinkle, a Mormon who was excommunicated after surrendering Smith to the Missouri militia in 1838. Lovely guy, yeah? Bennett's subsequent letter to the editor of the Hawkeye and Iowa Patriot describing the Mormon doctrine of marrying for eternity is the first of his writings that discusses eternal marriage as compared to the free love/spiritual wife doctrine he previously accused Smith of practicing, in which sexual relations were not in the context of committed marriage. It is unclear whether Bennett learned of eternal marriage from Hinkle or from correspondence inside Nauvoo. Interesting. Okay, so it sounds like he wasn't fully informed about Joseph Smith's early practice of polygamy, which I believe started around that same time, around the 1842-ish, 1841, I believe, 42-ish time, and that he just assumed, he made all these assumptions. Like, I don't know, you're a spiritual wife, you know? It sounds more like that, but like, even if that were the case, then he should have gone to Joseph and asked. Yeah, instead of just preaching it to other people and trying to sleep around. Creepy guy. Bennett briefly returned to Nauvoo in December 1843, but the sole record of that visit is in a notation in Smith's day book from his general store, showing a payment of the rent Bennett owed for the 39 weeks he lived in the mansion house in 1840 to 1841. Wow, he paid it really late. After December 1843, Bennett is recorded to have lectured only once more against Mormonism during Smith's life in Boston during the spring of 1844. At the 1844 Boston lecture, Bennett was not well received. He was pelted with rotten eggs and chased through Boston by the vast assemblage, which ran over several Boston police officers in the process. That's so funny. I guess that was the last one because of that, yeah? He never wanted to go through a negative reception of what he wanted to say, so he stopped saying it, yeah? After Smith was killed by a mob in Carthage, Illinois on June 27, 1844, Bennett surprised many by returning briefly to Mormonism and joining forces first with Sidney Rigdon and then with James Strang, two of several Mormons contending for leadership of the movement. Bennett united with the Strangites, who founded their own Mormon community on Beaver Island in Michigan. While there, he founded a short-lived Halcyon Order of the Illuminati to reinforce Strang's power over his kingdom. Of course he did. With Bennett's enthusiastic support, polygamy was introduced into the Michigan Mormon community. This led to the descent of anti-polygamists from Strang's faction and was a contributing factor leading to Strang's assassination. Shortly thereafter, in 1847, amid more charges of sexual misconduct, Bennett was excommunicated from the Strangite community. Bennett did not associate it with any Latter-day Saint group for the remainder of his life. Well, good. Jeez, that's so weird. Like, he joined this other group, this split-off group, and he was like, you know what would make this perfect? If everyone were polyamorous, you know? Like, he's not talking about polygamy, really. He's talking about polyamory, which is fine if he and all of his partners are okay with it, but it doesn't, it's just because you want to have sex a lot, you know? Like, if you were a reasonably decent person, wasn't trying to take advantage of people that, you know, felt vulnerable, like your patients, then it wouldn't be this issue. And because he introduced that doctrine to the Strangites, that ended up leading to somebody's assassination. Like, come on, John C. Bennett. Stop being a creepy weirdo. That's disgusting. Bennett has been accused of having a part in Smith's murder, but as his biographer, Andrew F. Smith, no relation to Joseph Smith, states, based on the extant evidence, Bennett appears to have had no influence on the events that unfolded in Carthage during June 1844. Yeah, it didn't actually sound like he was. He was more into having sex with everyone than he was into murdering people, yes? Bennett is often credited with introducing into Mormonism the term spiritual wifery, the term he used for both his own practice of free love and for the Nauvoo practice of plural marriage. The term was occasionally used by Mormon leaders such as Brigham Young, who spoke of the shock he received when introduced by Smith to the spiritual wife doctrine, referring to plural marriage. One of Bennett's legacies was the conflation of plural marriage with free love in the popular imagination. Yeah. The term spiritual wifery, with its mixed connotations of polygyny and promiscuity, was frequently used in the national dialogue and in activism against Mormon polygamy. Yeah, but that wasn't really the idea behind it. You know, it's interesting because I know we're walking a line here of like what is right and what is wrong, but like polygamy was all with consent of all parties. It was not illegal at the time. It became illegal years later. I think it was 1860s when it was finally became a law that it was no longer allowed. Well, because it wasn't specifically addressed before that. So, you know, I mean, in the 1840s, when Joseph Smith was alive, it was legal. It wasn't illegal, let's say. And especially with consent of the other partners, like, I don't really see it as a big problem, you know? And if John C. Bennett hadn't been trying to take advantage of other people, I don't think I would have had as big a problem with him as I do. He was coming on to his patients. People in a doctor-patient relationship, that is a position of power. Yeah? He's exploiting them. And besides that, like, a lot of them were married already and weren't really looking to marry again, yes? And so he persuaded them to sleep with him, telling them, you know, using the church and his position in it to have power over these people. And that's really, really despicable. And I don't feel like Joseph Smith did that, you know? He wasn't using his power over people. He was asking them politely if they were interested. And, you know, if they weren't, then that was the end of it, you know? But John C. Bennett clearly didn't take no for an answer. Oh, what a creepy, horrible person. Legacy. Bennett's troubled relationship with the Mormons has overshadowed his other notable activities, including commanding a company for the Union in the American Civil War. Beginning in 1835, Bennett was an early champion of the health benefits of the tomato, a pioneer in the use of chloroform as an anesthetic, publishing his findings in 1848. And the creator of several breeds of chickens, including the Plymouth Rock fowl, which he exhibited in Boston in 1849. From 1830 to 1846, Bennett worked to establish institutions of higher learning, many of which were medical colleges. Bennett's practice of selling diplomas clouds that achievement, and only one educational institution survived Bennett's connection with it. Interesting. So basically what they're saying is that he tried to make money in any way he could. Yeah, he sounds very much like an exploitative person. He likes to exploit people. Look at that, selling diplomas. And so it sounds noble, like founding colleges and stuff. But if you just gave him enough money, he would give you a diploma, you know? So you have to have a certain moral fiber to do stuff like that. And he doesn't have it. He doesn't have it. Bennett left behind an extensive body of letters and published works on his various endeavors, including 2 books, History of the Saints and The Poultry Book. Bennett died in 1868 in Polk City, Iowa. Gosh. Okay. Looking at the references, yeah, his book, his own book, History of the Saints, or an expose of Joseph Smith and Mormonism, is on the list. Joseph Smith, Rough Rolling Stone, and The Saintly Scoundrel, The Life and Times of Dr. John Cook Bennett. Okay. It sounds like there's a lot of information in there. I'm not going to read them. I'm not going to even look them up. But like, that's if you're interested in his story, then it sounds like a pretty good source of information. This guy sounds awful, like horrible. Like, I'm so glad I never met him in person. You know, it's funny because this picture here, this portrait of him, is very reminiscent of that of Napoleon, yes? And I feel he's a little Napoleonic, yeah? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. What do you think? Am I right or am I wrong? You know, what is your opinion based on the information that we have? Anyways, I found that pretty fascinating, but it's really crazy how creepy he was. Like, what a horrific person. Like, not someone worth emulating, weighing someone in the balance. He was very much on the negative. Like, a very negative person. Anyways, I found that really interesting, though, and I hope you did too. And if you did, please give the video a like and subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you in the next video.